Viewers, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our series of TV programs on the economic challenges facing the Pakistan economy. Today we will be discussing economic reforms, especially reforms to our trade structure, the tariff which we have in place, and how we can move our economy by making it more competitive, by more closely integrating it into the global economy, and so be able to overcome some of the major structural constraints with which we are faced. In this context, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, who is a very distinguished trade economist and has been very active in trade diplomacy, trade policies, both at the international level and at the national level. Dr. Manzoor is a career civil servant who comes from the revenue services of Pakistan and who has served, amongst others, in the international body, the Custom Union in Brussels, but most recently he was Pakistan's ambassador to the WTO for many years, from where he returned to Pakistan and has been an advisor in different forms to international organizations and agencies and also the government of Pakistan. So Dr. Saab, welcome.
Thank you very much, sir.
So let me start by saying that Pakistan had, of course, started on a policy from the beginning of the 50s and to some extent in the 60s of import substitution, industrialization. That is, that we set up our industries behind high tariff barriers. Then we have been through a process of trying to open up the economy slightly in the 60s, then falling back in the 70s to a different set of model. And then in the 80s, following a rather conservative policy, when the world was opening up in a big way, when you had the East Asian miracle and all this fast-growing export-led growth.
Yes.
Now, Pakistan started reforming itself in the 1990s. Could you say something about what were the basic fundamental reforms in the tariff structure, and how do you think they panned themselves out?
As you said, I rightly said, in the 50s, 60s, almost all developing countries were more or less following these import substitution policies behind huge tariffs. And but I must say, compared to many other countries, Pakistan was more open. So it was kind of doing much better than many other developing countries. Then came the 70s and we had this experience with nationalization. Nationalization on one side, and the other thing was that these big corporate, like the steel mills, came in the public sector. And by definition, because they were run by the bureaucracy, by the government, they were kind of not very efficient, and they wanted higher protection. So on one side we had these steel mills, etc., which they provide the raw material for all engineering industry and everything. And if on the basic raw material you have 40, 50, 60% duty, then everything down the line doesn't work. And then these other nationalized industries also started asking for more protection. They became inefficient, more protection. So we were in this, from 70s onwards, more or less, we were in this high tariffs and this thing. In the 90s, I think with they realized that our exports are stagnating and all these other problems in the economy, they started opening up. But this process was relatively slow. They started up, 120% and 30% tariffs, so they bring it down to 100%, 80%, 70%, but still they were not getting there. And the last big push came. Every time this push came, whenever we signed up with IMF, they would say open up more. Our World Bank, they were not really indigenous run liberalization, so there was no ownership. And whenever IMF program comes, we do it for 2-3 years, and then we withdraw in the shell. And 97, they started the big exercise of opening up. And it went on for 2 years. Then 98, 99, we had this nuclear problem. So there was the problems of foreign exchange, etc. That process stopped. But then the next government came, 99, 2000. They signed up again with IMF. And the big push came for liberalization in that period. And they brought down the tariffs, say, from 45% and around there. There were some exceptions, like auto industry. Very powerful lobby. They would not let their tariffs be touched. There are exceptions, maybe we are coming to that later on. But otherwise, the maximum tariff was brought down to 25%. It was expected that this policy will continue, and over the next few years, will bring down tariffs to more like other regions or more successful countries. Unfortunately, from 2002, we stopped complete, and there has been no liberalization. The only liberalization that has taken place is whatever if we signed a free trade agreement with somebody. So some tariffs came down. In fact, many times we went the other way around. In 2007-8, I think, they picked up a large number of items, what they called luxury items. And luxury items could be anything. For some people, paper could be luxury item. Others, pen, somebody, this thing. So they put a long list and they put regulatory duties. And now more recently, this government, every few months they come up with a long list of regulatory items. They categorize in luxury items and they put more regulatory duties on this. So Pakistan, recently some research was done by the World Bank, and they had come to Islamabad and they were presenting that. And they said, look, you have become, you're at least 3 times more tariffs than South Asia, not South Asia, Southeast Asia. But you, even within the own region, you are at least twice around that compared to other countries.
I think, Dr. Saab, you absolutely said the right thing, that Pakistan, as compared to India, for example, at the beginning of the 80s, was a more open economy. Yes. We were more globalized.
Yes.
But when the world began to globalize at a fast pace, Pakistan could not keep up for whatever reasons. Now, there are 2 sets of issues regarding tariff reforms. The first is the way you cascade your reforms. You have them more on consumer goods, less on intermediate goods, and very low on capital goods. But underlying this whole idea of tariff reforms is to make the economy more efficient. Industries should have raw materials at lower tariffs so that they can compete in the global economy. Now, there are 2 sets of questions which I want you to answer in relation to this. The first is that under the import substitution model, you sort of don't have an overall structure of tariffs. Broadly, yes, higher on consumers, less on intermediate. But individual industries are given protection according to what is seen to be their need. Now, one of the questions is that if you open up your economy, then your exports should be going up, then new manufacturing industries should be set up, an industrial sector should emerge which should be creating more jobs in the economy. Now, if we look back, starting from the period of economic reforms, whether the pace of economic reforms changed with the economic conditions, whether the pace was at times arbitrarily determined because of vested interest. But the bottom line is that at the end of the day, neither have our exports in manufacturing diversified. We are still a cottonomics economy. Most of our things are related. Nor have we created more jobs in the manufacturing sector. Nor has the share of industry or manufacturing specifically increased. You could say that Malaysia tha, Korea tha, Singapore the, even Thailand, the share of industry began to increase. But even today, Pakistan manufacturing has not been able to really bloom or blossom out into a new phase of industrial growth.
ठीक.
Now, is it that the whole reform program did not think through what the industrial effects would be and what kind of industry would emerge? Because the World Bank and IMF don't believe in industrial policy. They believe in tariff reform, they don't believe in industrial policy. Where do you think the problem was?
First, I think we never had continuous reforms. I mean, if you compare us with any of the other countries, there was always some continuity. For example, Turkey. Okay, in 1980, they had 3 billion of exports, and so did we, 3 billion. Then Turgut Özal came, and with different governments, he stayed on there. You know, the subsequently became the prime minister, and got a longish, and then he had a vision, okay, we'll have the same tariffs as the EU. We go there. In 10, 15 years, we go there. And by 1995, exactly on all industrial goods, the same. And the whole country was up against this thing that if Europe has been doing this progress over hundreds of years, and if we just go in 10 years, we bring down our tariffs and everything, we'll be gone, our auto industry will be gone. But they persisted. And in 1995, they entered into a customs union with EU. Same tariff for EU as for Turkey. And look at from 3 billion, they've grown to 150, 60 billion exports. And we are, from 3 billion, we are not even come to 24 billion, 25 billion. Similarly, if you look at India next door, started much later than us, 90, Manmohan Singh comes as finance minister, and then subsequently as prime minister. And those policies have sustained, continued. Pakistan, there was always this little bit of 2-3 years, and then it's gone. I mean, and again, whenever we did reforms, we had good results. I was just giving you this 97 to 2002, although, between we had stoppage of reforms because of that nuclear thing. But that little period of reform, when we reached a certain tipping point, Pakistan's growth was really doing very well. I mean, exports doubled within 5-6 years. Its industrial growth was, every single factor was in double digit. Industrial growth, everything was going up. There were problems, I understand. I mean, there was problem that because of if your industry is growing, so for every 1% of growth, you should have 2% for energy. But they didn't cater. Those things had to be catered. But overall, they were doing well.
So what you are basically saying, Dr. Saab, is that once the reform process was given enough breathing space to work itself through. And you are saying that starting in 99, though the period of low growth, but still after 2002, when the reforms were seriously pursued, for the next 4-5 years, we had 8 to 9% growth in industry and growth in the economy. Now let's look at this period a bit more also in detail. Though we had tariff reforms, as you say, and the average rate of tariffs, which is of course has a wide dispersion in it, began to come down. And you say that we had a much more easier access for producers to raw materials at more competitive costs. At the same time, and this is something which has always been around, we have this acronym called SRO, Statutory Regulatory Order, SRO, which is basically the government can override any tariff by giving special privilege to some particular producer who will show reason that he needs this particular tariff. Now, during that Musharraf period which was there, the government also launched what one would have called an industrial policy for engineering goods. An engineering development board was set up. And in fact, rather than the tariff commission, the EDB or the engineering development board itself became a tariff regulatory authority. And it started coming up with all kinds of statutory regulations. Now, at one time, we are trying to reform the tariffs. At the same time, we have an SRO system. So what impact does this kind of thing have on economic and industrial growth?
Just before I go on this, let me clarify a little bit. This Engineering Development Board came a little bit earlier, 95. So they came, and the purpose was they promote engineering, but they soon became, they got into this import substitution. Their whole mission was how can we produce everything locally and stop imports coming in. So they developed like that. Now this SRO thing was, you're right, there was these powerful interests because the tariffs were high and there were special concessions given to some for their raw materials, etc. But at the same time, these SROs were also, if they want to promote say, services industry, for outsourcing, they would have an SRO. If we want to telecom, they had an SRO for that. Agriculture promotion, for environment, for all these things. But then in 2002, one other big part of that exercise was to remove these SROs. And I remember, because I was at the time working in the Board of Revenue, we had 250 SROs. And first year, in 2001, that exercise, whatever we did, we changed the rate tariffs, we brought it down to 120. Next year, we did it and brought it down to 60. And we thought this will continue. And in 2-3 years' time, but then on, nothing was done. Till now, this 2-3 years ago, when we signed up